Well, I'll take it from here anyway. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you all. I'm delighted to see so many people, and I'll try and entertain you a bit and educate you a bit over the next 15 minutes or so. I'll try and leave plenty of time for questions as well. So I'm a scientist, I'm a biologist, and on the face of it, I have a rather different type of job than what Amit has that you just heard from, because the organization that has been created around my work is a non-profit based here in Silicon Valley. But I have a great deal of interactions and interface with the private sector as well. So after I've told you a bit about the science that I and my organization do, I'm going to spend a little time talking about investments, just as Amit did. Right, so how did I get here, first of all? Well, when I was your kind of age, when I was in high school, I actually wasn't a biologist. I gave up learning biology at the age of about 15. And the first field that I went into was computer science. I did my undergraduate degree in computer science, and I did several years of artificial intelligence research after that. Now, the reason I did all of that was because I had decided at an even younger age, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, that what I wanted to do with my life was to make a difference to the world in some big way. I wanted to make as much difference as possible. And it was simply a question of which of the really bad problems that humanity has would I work on. So I went into artificial intelligence research because, number one, I felt that one of the really bad problems that the world has is the problem of work. The fact that people have to spend so much of their time doing stuff that they would not do unless they were being paid for it. So, we need more automation, which of course is what artificial intelligence is designed to give us. So I found out when I was 15 and I started writing software that I was pretty good at it. So I thought, okay, this is where my talent lies. That's what I'm going to do. But the thing is that I had actually made an oversight, a rather big one. I had not realized that people don't always agree with each other about what are the important problems. And in particular, I felt then, and as far as I know, I felt ever since I was a kid, that the biggest problem for humanity, by far, was the problem of aging. The fact that people get sick when they get old. And of course, they get progressively more and more sick, and eventually they die. That's quite obviously, to me, the biggest problem for humanity. And I had therefore presumed that people who were studying biology would be working on it as hard as they possibly could in large numbers, and therefore that I would not be able to make a significant contribution just by becoming one more biologist, since I had no reason to believe that I would be a particularly expert biologist. So I ignored that problem until my late 20s, when I was working as an artificial intelligence researcher. And indeed, I was perfectly happy. I was doing pretty well, but I then met and married a biologist. And she, by accident, taught me a lot of biology, but also I became aware that she wasn't interested in aging. She thought that it wasn't very important. And so did all the other biologists that I met at that time. I was completely horrified. And it took me a couple more years to really come to terms with it and understand that this was really true. And so eventually I happened to be in a good position where I was able to switch fields. So that's what I did. And I did my Ph.D. in biology, and here I am today. I'm a reasonably prominent guy in the field of the biology of aging. You can find lots and lots of me on YouTube that will talk about a lot more than what I've got time to talk about today. But while I am here, I'm going to do my best to tell you a little bit. I'm going to try and share my screen now. Let's see if this works. Good. Share. That's good. And now I've got to get back to PowerPoint. Might be a moment. Okay. Bang. It's thinking. There we go. Right. If someone could just confirm that they can actually see my screen. Did somebody?
Yep, we can see your screen.
Great, marvelous, thank you. All right, so I'm going to spend about 10 minutes going through, in very broad terms, what I and my organization and now a lot of other people work on. And we are planning to bring aging to an end. We want to make sure that people simply do not get sick, however long ago they were born. And when I say get sick, I don't just mean get the diseases of old age like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or atherosclerosis. I mean get sick at all, even in ways that we don't call diseases. So I want people who are 800 to be able to keep up with their granddaughters on the dance floor. So this is a big thing though. We don't work on longevity. This may have been clear already, but let me spell it out, because a hell of a lot of people will tell you that this is a crazy thing to be working on, because what's the point of living a long time, stuff like that. We don't work on longevity, we work on health. We are interested in keeping people healthy. So longevity is simply a side effect of health. It's a big side effect because, let's face it, most people die from being sick. And therefore, if we can stop them getting sick, then on average, they're going to live longer. And we think that's a good thing, but it's still a side effect. So when people say, oh dear, you know, where will we put all the people if we don't have aging anymore? Or won't dictators live forever? Or, you know, doesn't death give meaning to life and stuff like that? Then you've got to remember that actually, you know, people don't say that kind of thing about things that they call diseases. They don't say that about Alzheimer's. They don't say it about cancer. So they shouldn't say it about aging either. You have to actually embarrass people into being rational and honest about this sometimes. Now, the fundamental thing that we have to start with is asking the right question. The right question is, what's so difficult about keeping people healthy when they're old? We're pretty good at keeping people healthy when they're young, and we used not to be. 200 years ago, more than a third of people, even in the wealthiest countries in the world, would die before the age of 1. That's the definition of infant mortality. And of course, lots of people would die in childbirth and so on, and that hardly ever happens anymore in the industrialized world. And even in the developing world, you know, they're catching up really fast. The average lifespan in the whole world added together is now about 73. So, you know, what's the problem? Why is it so much harder? Most people think it's just the complexity, that there's so many things that go wrong with us late in life. And they go wrong at more or less the same time, so they interact with each other. It's just overwhelming. Most people think that's the whole answer, but it isn't. And in order to tell you what the whole answer is, I'm going to start by giving you a definition of aging, a really simple one that kind of demystifies it and shows you that aging is not hard to understand. Aging is just the combination of these two very simple processes. First of all, on the left, there's a process that goes on throughout life, even starting before we're born, which is that our metabolism, the network of processes that keep us alive from one day to the next, creates damage. It creates changes to the molecular and cellular structure and composition of the body. And we call that set of changes damage because the body is only set up to tolerate a certain amount of it. And eventually we reach the point where the damage is more than what the body is set up to tolerate. And that is when things start to go wrong, when the right-hand process kicks off, when we start to get the various health problems of late life that we're so familiar with. And of course, those problems get worse and worse as the damage gets more and more. So now most people think, what's going on here? And my slides have stopped working. Hang on, give me a second. I'm going to, I've frozen up. Won't be a moment. That's it. Oh, okay, good. Right. Right. Back to presenter mode. Right. Yeah. Most people think that this is the whole answer, but it's not. So this is the definition of aging. Now, this is where people go wrong. If you ask most people, in what ways can somebody get sick? Then the answer that they give will usually be something like what you're seeing on this table. They'll say, well, there's infectious diseases, that's column 1. And there's genetic diseases like the ones I've got in column 2 that occasional people inherit from their parents. Then there's the chronic progressive diseases, that's the big one, things like Alzheimer's and almost all cancers and so on. And then most people will think of aging as this fourth category that's completely different. It's nothing like diseases, and it's kind of, woven into the fabric of the universe in some way. And it's like, it's off limits to medicine, most people will think. This, however, is the real way that you should be thinking about how to get sick. The columns, if you look closely, they're all the same as they were on the previous slide, but the big black line is in a different place. And that's because the diseases of late life, as we call them, are not really diseases at all. They're actually just bits of aging that we've chosen to give disease-like names to. And that helps to make you understand, first of all, that health is a good thing, whether or not it goes away because of column 3 or column 4. And secondly, that the things in column 3 are nothing like the things in column 1. So we would not expect to be able to cure them with the same kinds of medicines. Now, this is the mistake that people make if they don't think that way about aging. They try to attack the pathologies of late life as if they were like infections. They try to use the same medicines, and of course it doesn't work, because the causes of those pathologies of late life are still accumulating as damage. Now, it's happened again, hang on. There we go. Now, about a century ago or more, some people realized that, and they said, we've got to be more preventative. And they looked at the living world and realized that a lot of animals, there's a lot of variation between different species in terms of how rapidly they age. And so the idea was, well, maybe we can study that variation and figure out what's underlying it. And maybe we'll understand it well enough that we can figure out therapies that will make our metabolism run more cleanly, and generate damage more slowly. And that, of course, would postpone the age when we get sick. So that would be great. But that hasn't worked either. That's been totally unsuccessful. Here's why. It's complexity again. This is a small subset of what we understand about how the body actually works, how our metabolism works. And any of you who write software at all will know immediately that this is the ultimate nightmare of uncommented spaghetti code. There is absolutely no way that we're ever going to be able to disentangle this and stop it from doing the thing that we don't want it to do to create damage without having unintended consequences and stopping it from things we need it to do to keep us alive. But luckily, there's a third approach, and I would actually go so far as to say that this is the common sense approach. That is, let's leave both of the underlying processes alone. Remember that our goal is to separate metabolism from pathology, to allow people to carry on being alive without getting sick. And we can do that just by periodically repairing some of the damage that metabolism has generated. If we can do that reasonably well, then we don't need to slow down the rate at which metabolism does generate damage. We can just let it happen, so we don't have to understand it particularly well. And of course, the reason I call this the common sense approach is that we know that it works. Because the same definition that I've used for aging could equally be used for aging of simple man-made machines like cars or aeroplanes. Here's a car that's 100 years old. It was not designed to last 100 years. It only got that way because of comprehensive damage repair, comprehensive preventative maintenance. So it works. Now, of course, the big catch is, even if this is the common sense approach, is it feasible? Is the damage that we need to repair just too complicated to be able to repair? And the answer is no. It turns out that all of the types of damage that we need to repair can be described as just 7 different types of damage on the left-hand side of this table. So I don't have time to go through them all, but let me just, for illustration, talk about the top one. Cell loss. That's simply when cells die in a particular organ and they're not automatically replaced by the division of other cells. And the maintenance approach, of course, the damage repair approach, is just to replace those cells. And that is more or less what stem cell therapy is. We generate cells in the laboratory that are in the right state so that we can put them into the body and they know what to do to replace the cells that the body is not replacing on its own. And we've done pretty well, my organization, in kickstarting a lot of this. Stem cell therapy is an area that was already established and didn't need our help when we started 15 years ago. But the other areas that I haven't got time to talk about today were very, very neglected. And we had to do a lot of very pioneering, groundbreaking work to get things going. But it's been very successful. Now people really think this idea is totally normal. So this is a paper that came out after maybe more than a decade after I started talking about this. And it basically said exactly the same thing. They divided aging into 9 categories instead of 7, but it's the same idea. And this paper is basically holy scripture in biology now. Everybody cites it. You know, it's totally mainstream. So that's nice. So now for the last couple of minutes, I'm going to get on to talking about investment. I mentioned I would, because when we started, this was all so early stage, so basic, that investors who actually want to make money, not just to stay young, they just couldn't see how it would work. It was just too early. But we slowly and steadily pushed along, just using philanthropic money, donations to our charity. And eventually we got far enough that early stage investors, angel investors, did start to take an interest. So we've so far spun out half a dozen of our projects as startup companies. Here they are, and they're doing a very diverse range of things, and they're all doing nicely. And in parallel with us, a huge number of other companies have appeared just over the past 3 or 4 years. Here's just a small selection of them. I just totally can't keep up anymore. The website at the bottom right that I mentioned there, agingbiotech.info, is a very, very great resource if you want to know more about this. So I'll stop there and just point out that I wrote a book about all of this quite some time ago, but it's still very relevant. It's called Ending Aging, and you can get it any way you like. And I would be happy to answer questions for a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Hi, so we have one very important question.
All right, go ahead.
Rich, did you cut out?
I'm here.
Okay, I think Rich should cut out, so I'll go ahead and ask that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the very first question is, so how does one get into, how can mankind survive or live longer and healthier against deadly diseases? For an example being, COVID-19, stuff like that.
So I guess everybody has noticed that COVID-19 is predominantly a disease of the elderly. Of course, young people catch it, but they very, very rarely tend to get severe symptoms. Whereas when the elderly catch it, they are in big trouble. And that is because of aging. That, just like anything that is mostly a problem for people who were born a long time ago, aging makes a mess of our immune system, and it makes a mess of the whole rest of the body too, of course. But the immune system really goes downhill, and we just can't fight off diseases so well. Now, of course, we definitely need all the rest of medicine as well. We need vaccines, we need antibiotics and all that, but we already know how to make those. We're not making them fast enough, and I'm very pleased that people are recognizing that, so that next time we have a pandemic, I think we'll be able to get vaccines available much more quickly than this time. But the fact is, vaccines don't work very well on the elderly anyway, so we really need to fix this.
Right, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, a solution to this problem is, biotech, what you're an expert on. So a question we have from one of our guests today is, so how has COVID-19 transformed the biotech field, and what adaptations are being made?
Well, the transformation that COVID-19 is bringing about is only just beginning, of course, because everybody, at least everybody who's making decisions, is mostly focused on the immediate term, on getting the pandemic as under control as possible, as quickly as possible. And then they'll worry about how to preempt the next one, kind of thing. But, still a lot of people are talking about that. I'm certainly very hopeful that, first of all, there will be a great deal more investment in the infrastructure and the personnel and everything that's required to ensure that we can respond and preempt future infections much more rapidly and effectively than we did this time around. And since the elderly are so much more affected, and since every aspect of aging essentially interacts with every other aspect, there's a lot of crosstalk, I'm hoping that this will energize people to understand and to wake up to the fact that aging in general needs to be fixed. We need to actually rejuvenate all aspects of the body, not just the aged immune system.
Right, absolutely. So with aging, concerning aging, is whatever biotech that comes out of, solving this process, making our lives better, what's the price point for that going to be looking like? Is it extremely expensive? Will only the rich be able to afford it?
Yeah, everyone asks this. It's not going to be expensive. No, it's going to be made available to everybody who is old enough to need it. I know for that. I know that's true, even in countries that hate taxation like the USA. And the reason I know it's true is very simple. The cost today of the elderly getting sick is astronomical. Even leaving COVID out of the question, the vast majority of our medical budget in the Western world goes on the health problems of the elderly. And as I mentioned earlier, the developing world is catching up. So that's basically a global problem, not just a Western problem. So what that means is that prevention is better than cure. These therapies, yes, they will be expensive initially to deliver, but they will pay for themselves so many times over, so fast, that even if we leave out the whole humanitarian imperative to make sure these things are available, and for that matter, the electoral imperative, even if we just talk about the sheer mercenary economic imperative, there's no question about it. It will absolutely be economically suicidal for any country to allow these medicines to be limited by ability to pay when other countries are not doing so.
Very insightful. So I think our next couple of questions are going to be relating to, more about your personal life, your journey. So I think one of the questions we have is, so how does one get into biotech? What sort of degree did you pursue in college? Should they focus on taking laboratory classes, or like, what did that journey look like for you?
Yeah, so what it looked like for me, of course, was very unusual. I think I mentioned at the beginning that I started out doing computer science and I only got into biology late in life. And there's pros and cons there. When you switch fields in your late 20s or your 30s, very often you can actually do a lot in your new field just because you're not encumbered by the conventional wisdom of the other field that everybody else is. But not many people get the opportunity to switch fields late in life. I was very lucky that way, and you can't plan for luck by definition. So I would say if you're fascinated by this now as a high school student, then what you should do is first of all decide what kind of person you want to be later on. Do you want to be an investor or an entrepreneur? Do you want to be an academic, a professor? What do you care about the most? If you want to go into what I went into, the biology of aging, then the first thing I can say very simply for an undergrad degree is don't specialize. Do a general biology degree, because aging affects the body at every level of organization. So you have to have a good grounding in everything, in genetics and biochemistry and cell biology and molecular biology and physiology, the lot. So don't specialize until later on. That's really the main thing.
All right, great. So I think this concludes our time with you, Mr. de Grey. Thank you so much for joining us today.